can be seated. Prime Minister, Honorable Mayor Amor-Mortley, Minister William Duguid, other members of Cabinet, parliamentary representative, other parliamentary representatives for the wider Barbados area, members of the Senate, members of the Hope Inc., the chairman and his staff, members of the National Housing Corporation, chairman and staff, contractors, media personnel, good morning and welcome to Vesper Gardens. This morning represents the official launch of the Government of Barbados Home Ownership Providing Energy, Inc. The international human rights law recognizes everyone's right to adequate housing and adequate standards of living. Adequate housing was recognized as part of the right to an adequate standard of living in 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights and in the 1966 International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. Theresa May, former Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, in her forewords to a document entitled A New Deal for Social Housing, presented to her Parliament in August 2018, stated, and I quote, "The homes we live in are so much more than bricks and mortar. They are where we raise our families, put down our roots, build our communities. Everyone in this country deserves not just a roof over their heads, but a safe, secure, and affordable place to call their own. Social housing has a vital role to play in making sure they do this. It's not just about creating a safety net to prevent homelessness. By providing homes based on individuals' needs rather than solely their ability to pay, social housing helps to keep neighborhoods diverse and integrated, and it provides the stability people need to build their lives and communities." Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again, as I said, to the official launch of the Governments of Barbados Home Ownership Providing Energy, Inc. project. As we embark on our own new deal for social housing, this ceremony this morning marks a turning point and a new direction in the provision of housing for Barbadians, especially those more vulnerable than some of us. It is therefore my pleasure to introduce to you this morning the chairman of the new entity, Hope Ownership Providing Energy, Inc., Mr. Anthony Hoyes, to deliver the opening remarks. Mr. Hoyes.
Thank you. Morning, everyone, and thank you for coming. The Prime Minister and Minister Duguid will speak details of policy and some of the operations of Hope. My pleasant task is to introduce to you the persons who are responsible for executing this policy. And this is the staff of Hope and the professional consultants that we've engaged. So let me first of all introduce, say thank you to all the fellow directors that have got us this far. Hope was approved by Cabinet in late November 2020. So that was only 4 months ago. And through Christmas season and national pause of 4 weeks, we've still managed to get to this state where we can start to construct the first series of houses along this avenue. And the director that has been most helpful to me on a practically daily basis is Senator Rodden Adams. He's the brains of the partnership. And let me introduce our CEO, Ms. Tamara Allman. She's a product of the University of the West Indies at Cave Hill. But she's a BSc in Management Studies and an MSc in Labor and Industrial Relations. Got that right? And the rest of the team, small in number but mighty in capability. I'll ask them to come forward. You'll notice they're mostly ladies. This is the senior team of Hope Inc. And of course, we could not have got this far without architects. And I'm going to ask Linda and Shauna from Architects Cube to come and join us here. They created these wonderful designs that you see in record time, balancing between modern open plan housing and maximizing photovoltaics while preserving hurricane resiliency in the design of these houses. Linda and Shauna. Our wonderful engineer, Mr. Greg Hazard, from Mayhew, Ridley and Hazard. He's ensuring the structural, Greg, come over here. He's ensuring the structural integrity of our buildings. And our planning consultant, Mr. Billy Bain, making sure that we get all the necessary permissions. And absent is our surveyor, George Godson from Godson Associates, who is dealing with an emergency matter this morning. I'd also like to recognize the persons that are financing the construction. They're providing the mortgage loans. And while there's a lot of interest in commercial banks and other lending institutions in providing these loans, and believe me, we will have several of these developments going this year, the first person to step up to the gate and commit to it was the Barbados Public Workers Cooperative Credit Union, and I think Mr. Glenn Harrison is here today. We thank them. They'll provide 100% of the mortgages to our buyers, and we are grateful to the Insurance Corporation of Barbados, who are going to provide the house insurance at concessionary rates, and I think Mr. Oliver Jordan is here. I recognize him too. I thank you. I think that's the end of my allotted time. I'm going to turn you over to the MC, and I think Minister Dogood will say a few words.
Peter. Right,
This place here?
put on your spray there. Put on your gloves now.
Okay.
Oh, right. Get ready to put that back up. Get ready to put it back. Come on, you taking too much time, man. Come.
Thank you.
You hold on when you need it.
Thank you very much. First time I've ever been introduced as a dynamo, but I will take it. Honorable Prime Minister, other members of Parliament, in particular my good friend, Mr. Edmund Hinkson, Mr. Rommel Springer, Senator Ron Adams, also Mr. Neil Rowe, the Deputy Speaker, members of the Board of Hope Inc., distinguished guests, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Can you imagine being able to buy a 2-bedroom wall house and land today for less than $800 per month? Or owning a 3-bedroom house and land for about $1,000 monthly? Well, you'd better believe it, because today that is both hope and reality, all at the same time. That, in a nutshell, is the purpose of Hope Inc., ladies and gentlemen. To put good housing solutions within the easy, affordable reach of the average public officer or private sector worker. For example, the teacher, the police officer, the nurse, who might be earning $4,000 per month or less. As you may know from our manifesto, this government's vision is to drive down house and land prices to satisfy what is a basic human need and a fundamental human right. A right to adequate and affordable housing in Barbados. But I want to say this morning that it is a vision and a duty that this government will never grow tired of, striving to fulfill. Yes, the demand is great, but it is our daily task to find creative ways of meeting it. And that is what Hope Inc. is doing here this morning. The very competent and talented Hope Inc. board and officials will further explain the concept as we go along, including the photovoltaic component that you will be seeing on the roof. That component is implemented to reduce the price of the house to the consumer. But I assure you that Hope is only now beginning on what promises to be an exciting and rewarding journey to provide at least 640 housing solutions in the new financial year and 2,500 within the next 5 years to those who might not otherwise have afforded them at this time. It is not lost on me that the land on which we stand is owned by the National Housing Corporation. The National Housing Corporation, and that the project is being spearheaded by Hope. Both Hope and the National Housing Corporation are entities under the umbrella of the Ministry of Housing, Lands and Maintenance. And as we are going to use both to promote the national agenda of fast-tracking adequate, affordable shelter to all income groups in Barbados, while Hope Inc. will focus in a laser-like way on managing the rollout of hundreds of homes for sale, the National Housing Corporation will focus also in a laser-like way on rebuilding and maintaining its rental inventory, restoring derelict properties, providing affordable sales of land, and constructing houses on a slightly smaller scale. Both entities will be complementing rather than competing with each other, and both will target separate markets. But we absolutely need that clear focus, because what drives us is the quest to identify and satisfy the basic needs of all. I will have more to say in the weeks and months ahead as we move to various locations in Barbados to break ground at a number of other developments. I said during the last estimates debate in Parliament recently that my ministry will embark on 100% implementation campaign from April this year, because we recognize the inseparable goals of providing affordable shelter and putting people back to work at the same time. And we intend to waste no time in seeking to achieve these. So in closing, I wish to express the ministry's gratitude to all those persons who have worked diligently during the last year to bring us to this launch today. There is still much more work to be done to fulfill the promise of hope, but together we are going to put our shoulders to the wheel and get it done. And we encourage the private sector to join us. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Before we move ahead, I'm still seeing some of you, especially at the back, being a little too close to each other. And kindly let's continue to practice our social distancing protocols. Okay. We've all grown accustomed to the awesome competencies and skills in the area of governance and economics and law of our next speaker. But during the period 2019, when we had the national discussions on the new planning entity, and later that year when there was the national discussion on resilient housing, we saw the speaker again display her competencies and eloquence in the way she handled the more technical stuff relating to housing and house construction and the engineering around it. It was a quite pleasant surprise. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure this morning to introduce to you the Honorable Mayor Amo Motley, Prime Minister of Barbados, to deliver the feature address. Prime Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think your mic has a short. I've been around long enough to know when you have a good mic and a bad mic. Distinguished guests all, let me say that there have been many things that I've wanted to see since coming to government, but none more than this. It has always struck me that the most important intervention that a state or a government can make is being able to give a citizen roots. And a citizen gets roots when they have a stake in the country in which they live. And there is no greater stake in a country than to own a piece of the rock and to develop what, Mr. Chairman, you appropriately contextualized for us at the beginning of this morning's ceremony, to develop a home. I want to start at this point because, and I'm not going to talk long this morning, believe you me, because the facts speak for themselves. But in this country's journey of development since the 1930s, nothing has been more evident than the fact that the greatest task is to enfranchise and to root our people. And we have come through this journey through multiple directions. Education is critical to secure the enfranchisement of our people. But so equally is ownership. And as we have said since coming to government, ownership matters. You can pay rent, as I learned as a young student, and that rent that $600, $800, $1,000 is as good as it was when it left your hand. It is dead. Or you can pay the same money and pay it to a mortgage, and all of a sudden you are now owning something and developing equity, developing a capacity to go back and borrow against that very same thing. It is for that reason that the government made it absolutely clear that we could not complete our journey without ensuring that we allowed Barbadians to be owners of the rock, and to recognize that in many instances the journey of police constables or nurses or teachers or admin officers or clerical officers or people who work in stores in town or people who literally work as administrative staff in insurance companies and other kinds of work in this country, believe you me, that they too want a chance. But while we gather here this morning to deal with one reality, the truth is that the housing needs of the country is multifaceted. And because there are different needs, we expect over the course of the next few months to see a number of different responses coming forward. There are already a number of private developments that have been going in the country seeking to sell houses. This Hope Direct will allow us to be able to have affordable housing, and as the Honourable Minister indicated, for $800 for a 2-bedroom house and $1,000 in terms of repayment for a 3-bedroom house. And what was the mandate given to the ministry and to the company? That we must find every way of being able to reduce the cost of prices. And I've said it before publicly. 1, reduce the cost of land. 2, reduce the cost of services developing the land. 3, reduce the cost of the mortgage for the house, the cost of capital. And 4, reduce the cost of construction for the housing. And the 5th one is the empowering one. Use the asset to earn for the homeowner, such that if there is a gap between where they currently are and where they want to be, that the asset of the house with the use of the photovoltaic panels on the roof, that we can therefore bridge that gap. And persons who would otherwise be incapable of accessing a mortgage and being able to buy this property because it is outside of what is considered affordable by the established financial community can now do so. Now, my friends, this is a case of being creative and compassionate all in one to establish a platform for hope becoming reality. Creative and compassionate all in one. And why? Because those persons who agree to the assignment of the revenue from the photovoltaic panels over the period of time that it is being assigned for will get the benefit of that by way of not having to put the deposit down with respect to the land. Now, I want to see more ingenuity as we go across our landscape for housing. And we recognize that while this one will deal essentially with persons earning $4,000 or less, there will soon be another groundbreaking that is intended to deal with persons between the range of $4,000 to $8,000 a month collectively as homeowners, because there are different needs. But even as I say so, we are also deep in discussions to be able to deal with that other class of person who perhaps more than any other need it because their circumstances of housing are considerably difficult and challenging given the density and given the lack of quality housing available to them. And we have determined as a government that we are not leaving any class of person, any group of person out of this mix in terms of being able to have homes in this country and to have a decent platform to raise their family. And why do I say so? We look at blocks and we say, why that block exists? But a block at the end of the day is that place where persons go to get comfort. Just like us, look, where are we? Under a tent. You ever see a block other than under a tree or under a shed? Because that is an expression of how people will find community and solace within the area in which they live. It is instructive because we then have to ask ourselves, and particularly those of you who are designers and architects, how do we create that homely environment to ensure that persons want and can stay and be comfortable within that space? And therefore, design is absolutely critical. And there's some old concepts that still stand the test of time. The old cowshed principle. Wind comes in on the east and goes out where? On the west. And other things that we have seen utilized in the course of our architecture, our Barbadian vernacular architecture over the centuries, needs to be utilized again. But in addition to that, we must now add a commitment to resilient construction. Because we know that the world in which we live is considerably different. And the biggest fear that I have as Prime Minister of this country is, in fact, a hurricane that can take away our rooftop, particularly those flat roofs that we continue to have tens of thousands of, because that became the norm in construction, quite frankly, after the shortage of carpenters after the passage of Hurricane Janet in 1955. And what became a norm did not necessarily take into account the realities of what a climate crisis would bring to us. So that the challenge is huge, because as we move to satisfy the demand of Barbadians for homes, we have equally to recognize that we need to reinforce the housing that others may not necessarily want to leave, but may not be able to withstand serious winds and serious floods. That speaker this morning is an indicator of what high winds does and will do. And my friends, I therefore ask, whether it is in public or the private sector, that greater attention be paid to the whole question of resilient construction, because the world in which we live has placed us very much on the front line of existential crises. This one, that we cause to wear the mask, we all feel it, and we know that it is different. I chair a committee for what is known as the slow motion pandemic, which is to fight against the superviruses that will come because our bodies are not responding good to them because of our overexposure to antibiotics over the course of the last almost 100 years. And to that extent, the dentist here to my left will find that he will not be able to conduct basic procedures if he goes back to his profession without there being serious risk of infection and sickness on the part of those coming. So let us get it right. We don't live in the same world that you were born into. And therefore, our behavior and our decisions have to reflect the changes that are necessary. And there is no greater expression of cultural policy than housing policy. There is no greater expression in a country of cultural policy than how you execute and plan your housing policy. And the last point that I'd want to make is that at some point we are going to have to be able to integrate the opportunities for people who live together to have mixed groupings and income, because this country is at its strongest when people of different backgrounds mix and when people of different backgrounds find common space together. The other aspect of it is that we cannot seriously contemplate as well any major housing development in this country without reinforcing the need for green spaces. My government has been resolute about the need for parks and green spaces and public spaces where people can reflect and come in tune with nature, but also give themselves the mental space, especially given all that we are carrying, especially given the anxiety that has been imposed upon the society collectively, families, and individuals. And to that extent, whether it is the National Botanical Gardens, whether it is Golden Square Freedom Park, whether it is other small parks and communities across Barbados, I've sent a very, very clear message that our environment, our green and blue environment matter to us, and therefore in the execution of housing, we need to make sure that and those spaces are created. I still have a housing development in my constituency where the persons promised when I first became a member of parliament that they were going to put a playing field and a park. Years later, they've never done it. So we're not taking any chances going forward. We're going to utilize planning gains to ensure that those things are done as a matter of obligation rather than as a matter of persons wanting to be asked to please sir if you can comply. There's no please sir when it comes now to being able to deal with the green spaces in our environment and the mental wellness of our people, because at the end of the day, if you are not capable of living in harmony with yourself, your family, and your environment, then life does not have the joy in it that it should have. So I want to thank Minister Yu. I think that the presence of and the execution of the projects will speak for themselves, and that is all I want Barbadians to recognize, that this government is committed to giving as many of you an ownership stake in this country. And this government is committed to doing it in a way that is affordable, and that we are going to think outside of the box each time, because we recognize that it is not a straightforward case, and that in many instances people need a helping hand up in order to be able to stand on their own. But as we have learned through the experience of Barbados Mortgage Finance Corporation before it was subsumed into Republic Bank, the default rate for lower middle income housing and lower income housing in this country and middle income housing for ownership is negligible, has been negligible. And to that extent, when you are dealing with a cultural profile of people who believe in Iraq, who believe in ownership, and who are prepared to make the step, then we as a government have a duty to facilitate it either through direct public construction or public facilitation of private construction or joint venture projects. And I hope over the course of the next year to 18 months that you will see a multiplicity of these approaches across the country. And may I say that while we are dealing with housing, we are also going to be dealing, as you heard from the Minister of Industry, in being able to also relocate some of the enterprises that are currently found in communities, particularly those dealing with car repairs and mechanics, such that they too can have a comfortable place from which to work, while at the same time allowing communities not to have to make the complaints that they cannot settle easily where they live because of the blockages or the environmental difficulties caused by uncontrolled garages and mechanics within residential areas. So my friends, this is a journey that I am happy to walk on. I am conscious as I do so that in this country, ownership has always meant something, and that successive governments have found a way to meet our people where they are. The 10 cents per square foot tenantries, plantation tenantries freehold purchase act, passed by the late Tom Adams, was not by accident. It was an attempt to make Barbadians owners in their land at affordable rates, given the commitment of the government to ensure that the sacrifices made through decades and centuries of exploitation could be repaid by them being able to have their families anchored on that land, and that people could buy 5,000 square foot of land, as they still can on plantation tenantries today, for $500, the price that is less than a pair of sneakers in Bridgetown. Similarly, that we came in the 1990s, 1994, under Owen Arthur, and we introduced the $2.50 urban tenantry price, because we recognize that while plantation tenantries could carry the subsidy of being able to make it affordable for the tenants to buy, that in town, when people came to town, that small landowners invariably were the ones that were now at the center of the discussion, and that you could not ask a small landowner who only had 3 or 4 or 5 lots to carry the subsidy for the tenant that they so graciously allowed when they came to town as a friend or family to also settle nearby on that land. And the last government, therefore, of which I was a member under Owen Arthur, agreed to the urban tenantry transfer, which allowed all land owners to get the full price market value up to $15 a square foot, but the purchaser paid no more than $2.50 a square foot, thereby making it a lotto winning, because you could get 5,000 square feet of land at $75,000, and you, the purchaser, were only paying $12,500. And still, that is the case in Barbados, and the Urban Development Commission is still rolling out 10 subsidies to tenants of urban tenantries in this country today. The third step is now not land alone, but homes through hope. The utilization of the earnings from the photovoltaic panels, plus the systematic reduction in the cost of land, cost of services, cost of capital, and cost of construction, plus the income from the photovoltaic panels, as I said, has made what would otherwise be an unaffordable house within the reach of ordinary Barbadians who come to work every day to build this their country. This is what makes a government a good government. And I look forward, therefore, to being able to continue to have us meet the needs and the aspirations of ordinary Barbadians who, at $2,800 a month, who at $3,200 a month, who at $2,200 a month could not see themselves owning a decent house in this country at the rate at which prices had been rising over the course of the last decade. Let this now be the defining moment for change, to be able to explode home ownership in this country yet again through the combined initiatives of Hope Premium, Hope Direct, the National Housing Corporation's own construction efforts, private construction efforts, and the creativity that the government shall use in being able to make even the poorest of Barbadians homeowners through meeting them with creative arrangements in terms of subsidies as well as sharing with respect to mortgage insurance, such that they too can become owners in their own land and not tenants of the land. Thank you very much.
What we have all been waiting for, and the purpose of being here this morning, I will invite the Prime Minister and Minister of Housing, Parliamentary Representative, and Senator to join us for the turning of the soil to mark the official start of the construction of houses at Vesper Gardens. The ribbon for the official launch of the project.